everybody, and welcome back to the Black Lawyers Podcast. Today, we have the pleasure of interviewing someone that needs no introduction, the civil rights attorney, Black America's Attorney General, Benjamin Crump. Hi, Ben. Thank you for joining us.
How you doing, Attorney Carter? It's an honor to be with you, Queen.
Yes, yes, yes. We're so excited. I laughed because I said we've been waiting 4 seasons for Ben, so we finally we got him on season 4. I knew it was gonna happen eventually. People were like, when you Ben? I'm like, well, Ben, next time we're gonna get him on the interview. We're gonna get him on the interview. So we know that you're very busy with literally cases all over the nation. So it's not like just cases in Florida. So for you to take the time today to speak to us, obviously you have a lot of fans that listen to this podcast. It is the first ever Black Lawyers podcast. So you have a lot of people that listen to this podcast that are lawyers and law students, but just even non-lawyers and law students that are interested in legal news and Black law cases. So thank you again for joining us. So
thank you for having this valuable platform for our future civil rights lawyers and social engineers. This is what Charles Hamilton Houston and Thurgood Marshall fought for, to make sure we had a long bench for future generations of civil rights lawyers to fight for our people.
Absolutely, absolutely. And as you know, there's a lot going on in the world. Obviously, you're a part of some of those cases. We'll talk about those briefly in a few minutes. But I make all my guests play a round of legal hot topics. So you are in the hot seat for my top 2 topics today. The first topic is Wendy Williams, our sister Wendy Williams. As most know, if you're listening to this, she had a very popular talk show. And now, she was recently diagnosed with a stage of dementia and some other things. But even before that recent announcement last week, we knew that she is in this court battle with the courts, with a guardian that she did not choose. It was a court-appointed guardian. And the court-appointed guardian was essentially appointed to her because Wells Fargo took it upon themselves to assume that there was some fraud going on in her family and reported her and her account and said, hey, we're not going to let her have any access to her account until you, the courts, decide there's nothing going on fraudulent with her family. And obviously that opened the door for the courts to then, again, for whatever reason, they decided not a family member. Most people have a family member as a guardian, but a third party. So could you speak to that a little bit? I mean, I know you don't necessarily do a state's law, but just your opinion about what's going on and how Wells Fargo could even start something like this. I mean, to get where we are now with her case.
Certainly. And Attorney Carter, I think this is a part of a larger problem when it comes to courts imposing their wills on Black people. And I think it's absolutely appalling. Obviously, I will give the precursor that I am in litigation with Wells Fargo, but my feelings against them on this issue are objective. I believe that they overreached in many ways. And I think that the fact that her sister was willing to be appointed as the trustee over her affairs and so forth, who was a family member who knew her, who was prepared to do all the prerequisites to accept this oath and have the authority to do it, but the court overlooked that and when it got a white lady who I understand is a complete stranger, has no interest in Wendy nor her family. And let's face it, she has a right with the wealth that she has accumulated to do things for the benefit of her family, especially her son. And I will say we were contacted by Wendy at one point, our law firm, and we've been contacted by her son, and we're looking into the matter of a good estate lawyer to refer him to, because, and even though I may use my platform to bring greater attention to it, I always work with other lawyers, especially Black lawyers, on their expertise, because you want to make sure you have people who have mastered a certain legal um, uh, prospect or area that can help guide them and navigate them to get some measure of accountability back for Wendy or her family, or especially her son. And when you look at that documentary, you scratch your head and say, that, hold on, had Wendy been over the state, I'm sure she would have gave her son a big birthday party. That's what millionaires do. They do it every day, all across America. I can only imagine what people like Jeff Bezos did for their children on their birthday, or other celebrities, what's his name? Dr. Phil. He always talked about the things he did for his children on his birthday. So why should Black people be penalized when we do stuff for our children, when we work hard to build our brand and build our companies up and build our wealth up? So I think that they could have at least found a qualified African American to a point, somebody who could understand the culture and the background and the life experiences of Wendy better than this white woman who the family seems to have a lot of issues with. So
Mhm,
my
mhm.
perspective is that representation matters.
It does. Does. It really does.
Too many
And
people who listen to your podcast was more qualified or just as qualified as this white woman.
mhm, mhm. And it's interesting that you say that nuance because, sometimes people say, well, why do y'all got to make everything about race? And I'm saying, do you want me to open up the history book? Like people say, why is everything about race? And I hate to sound like Kenya Barris. It all starts with slavery. It does. There are different nuances and things that we would understand that, an attorney from a different background, such as Caucasian or Asian or whatever, may not understand. And I just, you're absolutely right. At a minimum, even if it couldn't have been a family member, easily an African American attorney could have been appointed. But I take a step back further. The fact that, like you said, Wells Fargo, I think, overreached and just assumed that there was fraud just because there was some purchases with her son. And the purchases, to be honest with you, weren't even that much. Most of it was like paying his rent because I think he
Yeah,
was in school or something. So it wasn't like, something where it's like, oh, wow, a lot of it was for necessity. So I just, again, I put it first on Wells Fargo for even opening up this door to even assume that there was some fraud going on in the family, and then the courts for not allowing at least a family member to step up, or at least maybe an African American attorney. But here we are now. We're happy to hear that they've reached out to you so that you can connect them with some sort of estate law attorney. That was the first thought in my mind. I said, well, they can always file a petition to change the guardian. There's nothing stopping them from filing that petition. Now, again, obviously, it has to be approved, and you want a lawyer to file it and draft it. But I'm hoping that will be their next step pretty soon. That they at least change the guardianship from this particular attorney to maybe a family member, so that things are better moving forward.
yeah. Attorney Natalie Jackson, Attorney Sue Ann Robinson in my office are speaking with them just about that. So if there's somebody out there who thinks they're qualified, please reach out to us and we will try to connect them to her son and her sister. I believe we're leading the effort to try to get some more accountability for their family.
Absolutely.
And I will say this, because it seems like Wells Fargo overreached, but it's endorsed by the courts. And just this morning, we're hearing about the federal judge orders minority business agencies to serve all races, which is part of what we're fighting for with the Fearless Fund.
Mhm.
They're trying to get rid of everything diversity, equity, and inclusion. You can't say that, well, we've raised $100 million fund by Black women to be able to help Black women start up businesses and get them investment capital, because Black women, as I understand from Ari and Simone, the founder of the Fearless Fund, are the most founded companies in America, but they are the least funded. And I mean, white men, literally, Attorney Carter, white men make up over 95%, if not more, of all venture capital money. But because Black women got maybe 0.35%, they're saying that's too much. and they're suing these sisters from Florida A&M University who did this great thing, you would think. And they're saying, oh no, we got to look out for white men because we worry about them being able to compete in the venture capital space. I mean, you got it all, but
It
that's
sounds ridiculous. You even said it out. Oh, we want to make sure that they can still compete. I'm very familiar with Fearless Fun and Ariana, and I just, just congratulate you with even the efforts you've done up to this point. The crazy thing is, they even said, well, we're not even just doing Black women, we're doing women of color.
exactly.
So you could be a Hispanic woman. So the fact that they tried to even make it seem like, oh, you're just going up against white people and whatever the case may be, that is not what they're doing. They are just catering to the disenfranchised groups that typically don't get funding. And there's really nothing wrong with that. And we're just hoping, like you said, the courts have some common sense. We know that the court is very conservative now for a variety of reasons. But we're hoping that that continues to push through.
I, I,
OPC.
I hold up my book to say, as I talk in the book, it's the intellectual justification of discrimination that the courts have done throughout history. They come up with technical legal reasons to justify discrimination. And that's why your podcast is so important, Attorney Carter, because we got to have our next generation of young civil rights lawyers ready to challenge these enemies of equality as they continue to try to take back the progress we've made. And the only way we can win this war, the only way I'm confident that we will win the war against the enemies of equality is that we must make sure that our children are more intelligent than those who will seek to oppress them. And so that's why, y'all, we cannot take it lightly. We cannot take it for granted. It's a game of chess and not checkers. And we got to get ready for the war because every morning they're trying to wake up and figure out how they can put us down.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you say every morning, I'm shaking my head because literally it's every day. Like what decision can we make to further disenfranchise them? Speaking of disenfranchisement, we have our brother Kanye West, which is my second hot topic. I know some people love him, some people hate him, but I always say was right is right and was wrong is wrong. And if you're listening, you may, there are various matters with Kanye, but the biggest one he's dealing with right now is his fight against Adidas. Right now, he obviously signed a contract with his likeness and to also come on as a designer. So that's copyright issues as it relates to taking his copyright designs and making them work for hires for Adidas, where they would take his designs, launch these shoes and these designs and sell them. Obviously, with him parting ways with them about a year or so ago, they had all this inventory that they still had to sell. And so they felt like by him, by them parting ways, there was some level of a breach of contract. So not only do they feel justified in still suing him for $250 million, even though he's not actually the one that ended the contract. They ended the contract, right? So they're still suing him, even though they ended the contract, he didn't end the contract. They want to still sue him for money, but they also have the more important issue I wanted to just briefly talk to you about is Black person's intellectual property. We talk about real estate and making sure we own land and things like that. But our intellectual property is just important. Our likeness, our creativity, our designs, our inventions, our music, all of that is important, right? So, what are your thoughts on at this point, what Kanye, because it's almost like he's stuck. It's like, well, you're suing me, but then you're still selling inventory that have my designs that don't have my approval. It's like he's kind of stuck in the middle. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, again, Attorney Carter, I think this is part of a larger complication with greater implications that affect race. It seems inescapable at times that you can't get away from the dynamic that race is always an issue. With Black people and intellectual property, let's step aside from Kanye. White people and corporations have the propensity to believe that even though your genius and your talents and your skills created the intellectual property,
Hmm.
well, we were the ones who were able to monetize it. So really, what you have put forth has very little value. And you see that in so many things. Uh, I mean, it's like apples and oranges. When Bill Gates come up with intellectual property, or Zuckerberg, or Amazon with you know, Steve, what's the Amazon CEO name? I can't even think.
I forget his name, but yeah, I know who you're
Bezos.
talking about.
Jeff
Bezos.
Bezos.
Mhm.
You know, and he was just doing delivery, but everybody respects his intellectual property, and it's of great value. And the courts will defend them over and over. Steve Jobs of Apple will defend them over and over again in their intellectual property rights. But when it comes to Black people intellectual property rights, they are so quickly to allow corporate interests to usurp their intellectual property and say, well, you don't really have control or authority of what you created. And we see this time and time and time again. And I'll get back to Kanye. I'm thinking about, Snoop Dogg and Master P, how they were created this cereal and it was their intellectual property. They had it, and the companies were putting it in the back of the stores in the stock rooms, and then trying to charge them a chargeback for the
Hmm.
product not selling, even though there was clearly a demand with all their social media followers. If just them went to get the boxes of cereal, sold out, much less all the other people who would just be
Right,
curious because it was on the shelves.
right.
And then I think about Henrietta Lacks, Attorney Carter, the fact that, this Black woman's not intellectual property, but her genetic
Her
material.
DNA, her DNA.
Yeah, she was butchered, and hopefully everybody on the podcast understand the majesty of this Black woman, Henrietta Lacks, who was the first uh, person in the course of human history whose cells would regenerate outside the human body. And I'm not surprised at all that it was a Black woman who was that powerful to be able to have the cells to be able to regenerate outside the body. But she was butchered by Johns Hopkins University in 1951 because of medical racism. And she ended up dying a horrible death 8 months later. But what she gave the world was miraculous. And the story is somewhat biblical to me because it was such sacrifice, even giving her life. But what a tremendous contribution she gave the world that improved quality health care for people everywhere. I mean,
And literally gave life.
gave
She
life.
literally gave life. Yeah.
Every modern vaccine, every modern medicine, all medical research done for the last 50 years have been because this immortal cells of Henrietta Lacks, these healer cells, and pharmaceutical companies have made billions upon billions upon billions of dollars, and her family didn't get not one red penny because they don't respect the intellectual properties of Black people. And so when they came to me and I sued them, a 70-year lawsuit, everybody said, Ben Crump, you're crazy. How do you think you can get around the statute of limitations? And
Patience. Hmm.
yeah, and Netflix is making a documentary on it, but it's kind of profound when you think about it, Attorney Carter, because you know this would not be an issue for Henry Ford's children and his
No.
grandchildren,
If
great
they had
grandchildren.
just respected her
Yeah,
contribution in the first place, out the gate, they said, well, your mom's passed away because we're going to continue to use her sales for these things. We want to, create some sort of licensing fee structure or something. So every
exactly.
time I make a drug or something, we'll just pay you out for the lifetime of whenever we use it. They could have said that out the gate, but like you said, you have to be looked at as worthy to even have that conversation. They didn't even look at her family as worthy human beings. I mean, even in slavery, we actually weren't even considered human. We were actually considered like animals. So
Exactly.
when you really look at the deep seated racism when people, even how people perceive you. You know, sometimes the racism is obvious, but sometimes it's subconscious. And
Yeah.
even if you're not consciously trying to be racist towards someone, there are some people that, you know, that are not black who, when they're dealing with black people, there's that subconscious racism where they don't value your opinion or your profits or your contribution because they don't even consider you're even equal to them. So, like you said, it's so deeply rooted, and we'll definitely look forward to that upcoming Netflix project that you just briefly mentioned that will dive into this some more. But yeah, I think, like you said, whether it be Kanye and his designs, Henrietta and her DNA, Snoop Dogg with his cereal, you know, it just it doesn't matter. All of it is not, they're not respecting the person behind it. That's step one. They're not respecting the person behind it. So they do feel like they can infringe and abuse and essentially get away with it. But lucky for us, we have you as the Black Attorney General. Even if you can't represent the case, like you said, you bring a lot of awareness to cases, even cases that you know, obviously that's not your expertise or you don't represent in. You at least bring attention to it. And so, you know, I'm sure people have said thank you, but if you haven't had a heard a thank you lately, we, you know, on behalf of Black Lawyers Podcast and everybody that's listening, Black America, we thank you for even just taking the time to bring awareness, even to cases that you can't obviously represent on because you are busy, you have your own life, you have your own everything, but you've dedicated your life to really just more than anything raising that awareness and fighting for the rights that, as far as I'm concerned, were our inalienable rights. They were the rights that we were supposed to always have from the beginning. So, with that being said, thank you for playing our round of hot topics. I knew you would disappoint. I never know what my guests are going to say with hot topics. Sometimes they say, "What did you say to that question?" You know, so you did disappoint. I really appreciate you playing that round of hot topics. Now we just want to transition into why we're here. We're really here about you today. People are always asking you about other people and other things, but we want to know a little bit more about Ben. I know there is a Netflix documentary called Civil that dives actually a little bit more into who you are. And if you're listening and you haven't watched it, please go and watch Civil. But we just want to first start off and ask, who were you before Benjamin Crump, the lawyer? Before you were in law school, before you became this lawyer, before you became this nation recognized lawyer, who were you before all of this?
You know, I was a young black boy, Helen's son. Um, my mother raised me and my two little brothers in the government housing projects of a small rural town of Lumberton, North Carolina. And my mom worked two jobs. The cleaning hotel rooms in the morning and then going to work at the Converse shoe factory, second shift, uh, every day to try to keep me and my little brothers um, in a position where we could have an opportunity at the American dream. I mean, she worked herself tirelessly to keep a roof over our head, to keep, food in our stomachs and hope in our heart. And everything I am and everything I am to be is because of my mother and her sacrifices. And I try to tell her that as much as I can. And I'll tell you a funny story, because sometimes I'm asked what's the best piece of advice I've ever received in life. And I go back to my mother, and man, like most children, we're so ungrateful and we little brats and everything. And I remember when I was in the fifth grade, Air Jordans were becoming that thing. You know, Michael Jordan was still playing basketball. His career was starting to take off, and all the children had Air Jordans. And I was mad because, you go back to school, you get new tennis shoes and so forth, but we couldn't afford Air Jordans. And I was literally kind of mouthing off at my mom, like, Why can't you get us Air Jordans? Everybody got Air Jordans and so forth. It's just not fair. It's not fair. And I never forget what my mother said to me. My mother said, well, life ain't fair. Life is hard. You
Mm-hmm.
make it fair by what you bring to the table. And if you don't bring that to the table, don't expect anybody to let you sit down at the table.
Mm-hmm.
And I never forgot that. Uh, and she had tears in her eyes when she told me that. And then I felt a little remorse as, this little 10-year-old ungrateful, nappy-headed brat. And I remember my mother saying subsequently to me that education was something to bring to the table because once you got it up here, nobody could ever take it away from you.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember Attorney Carter when I graduated from college at Florida State University. One of the first things I said to my mother was, I'm bringing something to the table, Mama. And, that is still the key for our people. Education, education, education. We got to make sure, as Mega ever said, they said the last documented words he ever said in life, he left for NAACP meeting in Jackson, Mississippi, where he said, if we can educate the masses, we can uplift the race. He went home to his house, got out of his car, Byron De La With, blew his brains out right in front of his wife and his children. But the last documented words he said still rings in my soul. If we can educate the masses, then we will be able to uplift the race.
Mm. Well, you kind of answered my second question a little bit, but you go from, being one of three hardworking mom, you graduate from college because you got to bring education to the table, right? Um, but you didn't have to become a lawyer. What led you down? You're graduating from college. What said, okay, I got the undergrad degree. Let me go down this legal path. What said, let me become a lawyer?
Yeah, I knew I was going to be a lawyer since I was 9 years old.
Okay.
At least that was my objective. And it was, again, partly to do with my mom, but Brown versus Board with all deliberate speed, 1954 Supreme Court decision where they had to integrate the schools. Got around to my school and finally in like 1979, I was in the third grade going to the fourth grade. They bussed us over to the white school where they had the newer facilities, newer books, newer buildings, everything newer. And, you know, it was there that I discovered that racism was not a organic phenomenon. It was a taught phenomenon because that's where the black children from South Lumberton, the predominantly black side of town, went to North Lumberton, and we met these little white boys and girls, and we ended up doing what children do. We all started playing together, became friends, and so forth. And so that taught me that racism truly was something that is taught to us. It's not something that's organic. And then I remember though, one day, as clear as it was yesterday, being on the school bus leaving the school, North Lumberton, on the bus, going back over the railroad tracks, literally. And as we were going through the white neighborhood, you saw all the roads well maintained, all the lawns were well maintained, the buildings were pristine, everything was just nice. But then when you crossed the tracks, you saw the roads had potholes in them, all the buildings were dilapidated. You had cars sitting on bricks. I mean, yeah, my little old elementary school was crumbling. I'm sure they had lead paint in it. And I just thought to myself, I wonder why people on one side of town seem to have it so good,
Mm-hmm.
and people on the other side of town seem to have it so hard and challenging. And I remember talking to my mom, and my mom said, well, the reason you get to go to the new school with the new books and new technology is because of the NAACP and Brown versus Board of Education and a lawyer named Thurgood Marshall.
Hmm.
And I decided right there, when I grow up, I'm going to become a lawyer like Thurgood Marshall, and I'm going to go fight for people who live in my community and people who look like me
Hmm.
to have a greater opportunity at the American promise of life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. And so every day I wake up, I have the same objective. Just like that little 9-year-old black boy, I'm going to fight for black people to have an equal opportunity at this American dream.
Hmm.
I'm never confused what my mission is in life when I wake up in the morning. Never confused.
And I think that's an amazing thing because sometimes I find people are still trying to decide what their purpose is, their goal, why they're here, what they're doing. Because, sometimes I say, well, I'm good at a lot of things, but just because you're good at something doesn't mean you're supposed to be doing it. So for you to be good at it, and it's your purpose. I do believe God put you on the earth for that role. I think it's amazing that you're good at it. Plus, it is your purpose. So you get to law school. What is your favorite law school class? I don't think I'm gonna guess it, but I'll see if
Yeah,
I'll let you know if I'm right. I'm gonna guess it, I think, but we'll see.
well, I was fascinated by many things, but I would have to say, because I'm a civil trial lawyer, I was fascinated by constitutional law and torts.
Okay.
And so, you know, that's what we do every day to this point. But I will tell you, it was in law school when I realized that and yeah, I ain't know this undergrad and so forth, but because law school, you have to know so much stuff. I learned that the biggest thing in law school was reading the table of contents and understanding that, hey man, you ain't gonna know everything. You need to know the general rule and then know the exceptions. And that's
Mhm.
what we need to know every day in law as we fight, whether it's Henrietta Lacks or George Floyd and everything. Well, are we arguing the general rule, or are we arguing that there should be an exception to the general rule? And torts was fascinating in that way. And then common law, and I still marvel over this concept that, you know, the creation of laws and legislative intent. Black people, we have to understand not just the law, but what was the law intended to address, because that's what I believe they're trying to do over and over again. They're trying to criminalize our culture. They're trying to stymie our ability to advance. Most of the laws are made by some people for a specific agenda. And we as lawyers in playing this game of chess, we have to figure out, okay, what is the underlying meaning of this law? Forget the label, but
Mhm.
what is the law really being designed to accomplish? And so that was what my courses in law school. I don't know if you were right, Attorney
I
Carter,
was
but
I was right about common law. I was right. I figured constitutional law for sure. So I got one of them. I always tell my guests my favorite is contracts. That's my favorite. That was my favorite one. I love to negotiate a contract. That's my favorite thing to do. Um, so you're
good to know. We're gonna refer some
yes.
contracts to you.
Look, contracts and intellectual property. I've helped the Ahmaud Arbery estate with them
Thank
stealing
you.
his likeness and acting all crazy. And, even the Alabama Brawl people, they didn't sold millions of dollars worth of merch, put their faces on it, haven't given these people a dime. So yes, I've been contacted, interesting enough. I never felt like I would be involved in certain types of cases, but even these cases have sometimes, like you said, layers of intellectual property where you have to have somebody that's kind of their niche. So I've definitely been proud to help those folks in those matters.
Thank you
As
so
you,
much for that.
thank you. As you know, less than 5% of attorneys are black, and then even less, 2.5 that are women, black women in terms of attorneys. So when you're in law school, you're kind of already walking through the door knowing it's only going to be a few of you in the room. Was there ever a moment that you felt discriminated in law school?
Yeah. Every day in America, we black. We always gonna be discriminated against, but we can't
Uh-huh.
ever use that as an excuse to not achieve. Um, I'm often reminded of what the great John Johnson, the founder of Ebony Magazine, said: "There is no denying excellence.
Mm,
It doesn't matter what they say, as long as you are excellent, you
mm,
will not be denied." When you go in the courtroom, I expect to go in the courtroom, and I expect the judge to be trying to help the other side, and that's okay
right.
because our ancestors have been able to overcome much greater odds. And so we shouldn't make an excuse that the judge is giving them rulings that aren't fair and so forth. My mom already told me it ain't gonna be fair, it's gonna be hard. But
Hmm.
the amazing thing about Black people, we're able to overcome whatever obstacles that the enemies of equality throw at us. And it's always gonna be a struggle trying to be able to achieve whatever level we achieve on, but we should never get discouraged by that because Frederick Douglass, who was also like Thurgood Marshall, a North Star for me, Frederick Douglass, the great Negro abolitionist, said that without struggle, there can be no progress. And that's a profound thought when you think about it. Even to make a car move, there has to be friction to have the combustible, projection of the car to be propelled forward. And so we should not be discouraged by the struggle. As Frederick Douglass said, we should celebrate the struggle because as long as we're struggling, that means we're progressing and we're going forward. And like W.B. Du Bois said, 10% of us are going to be blessed with the education. We're going to have the talent and the resources. He talked about the talented 10th, and it's up to us 10% to be able to help uplift the other 90% of our people who are not going to get law degrees, not going to get college education, not going to have, the tax but income that puts them at a certain bracket. I mean, we are so blessed, but the blessings do no good if we use them and keep them just to ourselves. Education does no good if we keep it to ourselves. We got to go get this education with all our people, all those little Black friends who we grew up in the hood with, who we went to school with. We can never, ever forget. But by the grace of God, there go I.
What was your favorite moment in law school? If there's a moment that you kind of, I mean, you have 3 years of law school, you do internships, maybe you do mock trial. I mean, there are various things you do when you're in law school. Is there a moment that you can recall?
I have a lot of favorite moments. I was president of Bossa and all this stuff, but I guess my favorite moment had to be when, in your third year, you get to uh, do the clinicals with the actual court where you go in the courtroom and you argue and you representing clients. And I remember we obviously, the public defenders program was part of where my heart was at because I wanted to help poor marginalized people. And so I kind of figured out I was going to be pretty good at this once I started, third year representing Black people on issues. But I would never forget this Attorney Carter. I went in there and I had a client and they had him right to center. I mean, they had all the evidence on him and everything. And so, all the jailhouse lawyers think they're smarter than us anyway. So I said, I'm talking to the class, we're going over the police report and the probable cause affidavit and so forth. I just laid down on the table. I said, hey man, what you want to argue? We gonna do this together. What you want to argue and so forth? You smart, And the funny thing, I was 21, 22 years old, because I graduated at 23 from law school. So I was 22 years old, I think, and he was probably 20, 21. And that Negro came up with all kind of arguments to make. And we was talking about based on Sixth Amendment right to counsel. Notwithstanding, they had his fingerprints on he broke into a car and everything, and they had some kind of surveillance that had a shadowy image of him and so forth. He came up with reasons why they should be excluded and all this stuff. And we went and we argued it before the judge. And my favorite moment was the judge agreed with us after we argued we argued cruel and unusual punishment. I mean, we just argued everything. And the judge was so fascinated with our arguments that the judge dismissed the case against him. And that was such a surreal moment because then Daryl Parks and we turned down all our job offers and we said we're going to open up our law firm to do stuff that we went to law school to do to help our people. And ignorance is bliss. You don't know what you don't know. I would never advise anybody to do that again. I mean, all kind of malpractice, all kind of stuff you do, but you don't know it because I want, as our attorney Natalie Jackson always tell us, now our young Black children gotta also believe that the world is theirs too, and that we can do anything. They teach their white children to say, the world is yours. You can do anything you want. There's nothing to limit you. And so we came out cocky, full of confidence and hung up our shingle and went to it. And God looks out for babies and fools. And I guess we weren't babies, so God looked out for us fools. And we got successful pretty quick after the first year. But I never forget, we did rent law and doing whatever can pay the bills. And so we were doing a lot of criminal work. And I got real good at arguments against violations of probation because far too many young people of color, especially Black men, are on paper. Everybody on probation, and you get violated just by not showing up to your public defender's office or not paying on time and so forth. So I got real good at arguing with the judge and reasoning with the judges that, hold on, put them in jail. How's that going to be beneficial to
Mhm.
society and have him be able to pay the probationary fees and take care of his families and all this stuff. And, it would just ratchet up high and high. They'll have people creating new criminal offenses and so forth. All right, let's see if you can get them off of this here. And as a criminal lawyer, the biggest thing to do is to walk your client out the courtroom. And I got good at walking them out of the courtrooms and so forth. And you would walk out the courtroom, and when you walk out, everybody would get up and walk behind you. Hey, can I get your card, Mr. Crump? Can I have your card? And all that stuff. So that was always a good feeling when
Yeah.
we used to do criminal law.
Yeah, definitely. Um, like I said, your cases span so much. Like you said in the beginning, you were taking kind of anything, any case that would come, and now, you have your pick of the litter in terms of the type of cases that you take. What case would you say, I don't want to say your favorite case because you love all your clients, obviously. But what case do you think is really like,
One of the
I don't
most
know,
common.
that just sits with you, was maybe just like a turning point case? And I know there's so many, but if you had to pick one.
It's real hard because I even think now God has blessed us so much, and we have it's a great team effort. We get 10,000 calls a week. I got two call centers, about to open up a third call center just to try to service all of the demand and working with great lawyers. I try to always work with lawyers in the cities and the states that I'm in, and I always try to have a Black lawyer on the team, even if I'm working with white lawyers, because I think representation matters, and we need to see our young gifted lawyers, our young sisters and brothers in the spotlight as well. And so I always try to use the reflective sunshine. If you see me in a press conference, I'm always trying to elevate, other lawyers and what they are doing incredibly to help get justice. And so in answering that question is almost very challenging. I guess obviously you think about George Floyd and Breonna and Trayvon and
Avon.
all the things, Ahmaud Arbery, T-
Mm,
uh, Tyree Nichols, all of them, Botham Jean, Terrence Crutcher. It's so many.
mm,
Henrietta Lacks, the Flint children that we got the record settlement for in Michigan. But the one that uh, is very unique and special is Papa Renty versus Harvard, the slave photographs case, which was 150 years old. Uh, we're representing Malcolm X's family. That case, 50 years old. We're representing Henrietta Lacks. That case, 70 years old. But the Harvard case was 150 years old, and we won before the Massachusetts Supreme Court. And I think my arguments there was one that I was very proud of because, you had these photographs that were taken in 1850 by this racist Harvard professor while Abraham Lincoln was talking about Emancipation Proclamation. Harvard professor was going around saying, no, no, the slaves shouldn't be free. I can prove that they're inferior and that they are more agrarian and they belong on the cotton fields. And it was kind of deep, Attorney Carter, because he wrote all these racist theories, but then he said, I need visual evidence. I want ocular proof, to use Shakespeare's words, uh, ocular proof of the inferiority of Black people. And so he went, around looking for a pure African because, by the time 1850 and 1818, I think, or 1817, they outlawed the importation of slaves. So all the slaves produced in America after that time was cause of rape and molestation by the slave master of the Black women. And so he didn't want a slave that had mixed race. He wanted a pure African. And so Charleston was the place where over 70% of all slaves came in through America. And Renty Taylor, as he was named after his slave master, was a person they referred to as the African because he was pure. And so he went and stripped Renty down naked. And, these white men measured his lips, measured his chest, his male genitalia, his buttocks, all these things that are just crazy to prove that we were inferior. And then they stripped down his daughter Delia and did the same, measured this, and she was only like 19 years old, 20. And photography was much different back in the early beginning. You had to stand there for 45 minutes to an hour while the photo would go through the dynamics to become a picture. And she had to stand there with these men measuring her breasts, her lips, her uh, buttocks, her female parts. I mean, I'm sure it was the most disgusting thing that, she had to endure. And one of the photographs shows a single tear coming out the corner of her eye. And a Yale professor wrote a famous book called Delia's Tear. And she said in that single tear, it represented all the rape, misogyny, and sexual harassment that women of color have had to endure since being brought to North America. And so, long story short, these photographs, Harper's possession, my client, Miss Pamela Neer, promised her mother on her deathbed that she would tell them that that man in that picture that is everywhere is their great 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 grandfather, and that he wasn't illiterate or inferior or insignificant, that he would taught himself three languages and that he was special and so forth. And she had the audacity to sue Harvard for these photographs that are now worth $100 million. Some of the earliest known photographs still in existence in the history of the world. And, you know, they cost about $1,000 a day to maintain them. They're that rare. And we sued, and I'll just say this one line, and was the most special case, I think, or one of them. I went in before the Massachusetts Supreme Court, and I said, ladies and gentlemen, may it please the court, I'm Ben Crump, and I come before you as an attorney because I said, I come before you as an attorney, and I come before you as a Black man. And most importantly, I come before you as a free Black man. Because 200 years ago in this very courtroom, there was a courageous decision made to change the course of human history in America. And that is because this court was the first court in 1811 to judicially outlaw slavery in America. And so now here we are 200 years later to see if you all will have the courage to make a decision to finally free Papa Rente from the bondage of Harvard. They had him enslaved while he was living, and now they want to keep him enslaved throughout eternity. And we argued that case, and Harvard had their great lawyers. It's on the internet, the whole argument. And after God knows about 11 months, the Supreme Court finally came back and rendered their decision, Attorney Carter, and they rendered a unanimous decision denying Harvard's motion to dismiss, saying that this Black woman had the right to recover for the negligent infliction of emotional distress, not only for her, but also for Papa Rente and Delia. And it was an incredible decision. It's about 14 pages long. And I am fascinated about that decision because they totally rejected Harvard's argument that they had the right to these pictures just because they own the right to the photography of it.
Hmm. And like you said, it's a very nuanced case, and I'm sure people listening that weren't familiar with the case, because people hear Ben Crump, of course they think Trayvon Martin, of course they think George Floyd, of course but this case may not even be something that someone was even aware of. So I appreciate you sharing that very special case and how it essentially that nuance argument was something that you guys were able to win. Just briefly, you mentioned one of the oldest cases you're also now kind of leading the path with is the Malcolm X case. Can you say just briefly what exactly you guys are going after in that case?
Certainly. So Malcolm X was assassinated in the Audubon Ballroom 59 years ago. And everybody knows that they had undercover government agents in that ballroom, 9 of them to be exact. And, they had done all type of things to take out Black leaders, whether it was Fred Hampton, whether it was Malcolm, Martin Luther King. We know they had this counterintelligence program, popularly known as COINTELPRO, made known by Tupac Shakur's mother, Afeni Shakur, in their famous trial. The Black Panthers in New York, Panther 21, had been arrested and accused of trying to destroy government monuments like the Statue of Liberty, which coincidentally, Malcolm's two of his main security was arrested a week before by the same undercover black police officer saying that they were conspiring to blow up the Statue of Liberty. I'm like, man, get something new. You kept using the same thing to try to go after black people. But also the main killer, Bradley, of Malcolm X, who everybody knew had a shotgun, blew him up, was allowed to walk scot-free out of the Audubon ballroom that day after killing Malcolm X with others. And they falsely and wrongfully convicted two black men who they knew were innocent. And, a year ago, the government finally capitulated and awarded them $37 million. That is New York City and New York State. And then you got to think Bradley, this guy who, with a shotgun, if you watch the Spike Lee movie, we got a pretty accurate portrayal of Malcolm was shot 17 times. They wanted to make sure he was dead. But this guy, months after, a couple of years after killing Malcolm X, they go and they rob a bank. Him and his accomplice are arrested. His accomplice is convicted and sentenced 25 years. He is arrested, allowed to walk out of jail scot-free. What kind of relationship does he have with the feds where they're not going to hold him accountable? And we must remember that J. Edgar Hoover had said 6 months before Malcolm X was assassinated, must do something about Malcolm X. That's what he sent down to all of his agents. We know from the federal papers that have been discovered. So we believe that if the people who were wrongfully convicted for killing Malcolm X was compensated for $37 million for their liberty being deprived for 20 years, then the people most affected by Malcolm X being killed in the conspiracy to assassinate Malcolm X are his daughters. And we believe it is long past due that the city of New York and the federal government do right by Malcolm X's family. Everybody knows their fingerprints were all over this assassination. And even though we know, as Malcolm said himself, I mean, he was providential. Malcolm said they will pay one of us to kill one of us so they can say it was one of us that killed us. And I believe that's exactly what happened with Malcolm X. It was conspired by from the very top. We believe J. Edgar Hoover himself set in the motion, just like they set in the motion to kill Fred Hampton in Chicago. And we're going to get justice for his family.
A few more questions. It
I
actually
got,
leads.
I got probably one or two more.
One, two, yes. What I was gonna say is this case actually speaks to the larger issue of just like police reform and bad actors in uniform, right? Just briefly, what do you think is going to take to really get to the heart of police reform? Because I know we have the George Floyd bill. I know that is something that will start to penalize them a little bit more. Outside of that, is that the main thing that we can start off with to really start making a path through this? Or is there something else that you feel like if that were to start happening, that would improve these bad actors and police and the people that
I
are
think
supposed
it's
to
I
protect them?
think it's I think it's three things. First of all, part of it is holding them accountable, sending them to prison. It will make them think twice. And because the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act has passed in 100 cities and states legislatures across the country. You just can't get it to pass in the federal government because
Right,
the political gridlock.
right.
So we're making progress. We still have a long way to go, but we're making progress. Uh, but that's the first thing, if they're held accountable criminally. The second thing, and what I just believe completely, America is a capitalistic society. If America understand anything, we understand money. And if we keep hitting them in the pocketbooks, bankrupting these cities, making it financially unsustainable, to be able to kill black people unjustly, they will absolutely stop killing black people. Absolutely, no question in my mind, because we see it with corporations. Every time we make these banks pay $100 million for discriminating against black people, for banking white black, which is one of the main things I do that people don't know about because it doesn't get their attention. And I understand that until we get economic freedom, all those other freedoms are much more challenging. But once we get economic freedom, then access to education, quality health care, capital, everything, once you can get economic freedom, then that's what I fight for probably more than anything right now for black people in America. So that's the second part on police reform, that make sure every time they shoot a black man in the back, that they got to pay $10 million. Then there'll be less black.
And you speak to that because I know you just want to mention briefly about how to sue the Klan. That kind of is mentioned in that
Yeah.
really, if you hit the pockets, that's
Yep.
if we don't understand anything else in America, it's the
Money.
dollar. Mm-hmm.
Money. They understand money. I mean, America, I sometimes where we'll sell our soul for a dollar bill. And then the last thing has to be in everything. When I go to negotiate, I don't care whether I'm negotiating with the city of Memphis or the city of New Haven, where we got the $45 million for Randy Cox, who the police horribly injured and paralyzed. You got to create a win-win scenario. We have to figure out how they will see it as more beneficial if they didn't kill black people
Mm-hmm.
unjustly. They didn't violate the constitutional rights of black people. If they don't engage in excessive force, we got to get there, Attorney Carter. That's a more challenging thing to
Right.
make understand. It's a win-win scenario if you treat black people like you treat white people and white citizens, then we all can win. Right now, they think it's better. I believe they must think it's better to say that we can violate your constitutional rights because that helps us with the status quo of keeping you in your position and your slate in life. I think that must be what goes through their mind, because other than that, you don't hear about them shooting white men in the back. That don't happen frequently, if ever, because they know there would be, as Bernie Mac says, consequences and repercussions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Last question.
Yes,
What
ma'am.
do you want to be known for? We don't want you to leave the earth anytime soon because we need you. But when you're gone and on to the next side, what do you want to be known for? Ben Crump, fill in the blank. What do you want to be known for?
It's real simple. On my tombstone, they're probably gonna put he was an unapologetic defender of black life, black liberty, and black humanity. And I am fine with that uh, motto, because I believe we cannot be shamed to say that I stand for black people. Too many times we try to say, oh, well, I stand for everybody and everything. And that's fine, nothing against that. But there gotta be some people who will stand up for our people who were kept in the fields and never allowed in the house. And understand the majesty of Mother Africa and say, I stand for black people with our sun-kissed skin. And we think we're just as beautiful, just as powerful, just as intelligent and resourceful as anybody else on this planet. And that's why I get up every morning to say to my little girl, my boys, and everybody, my children, y'all, you too are a child of God. You're special, and God has a purpose for you. And you are the best that we have to offer the future. And no matter what society says, if nobody else says it, remember your daddy told you you were the best. And we got to tell all our children that 100 times a day. to deal with how many times society is going to try to tell them they are not.
Well, that leads to our final moment, which is our Black Excellence moment of the week. Georgia native Ray Curtis Petty Jr. was told all his life that he was a special ed student, that he probably wouldn't even finish school. And now he's become the first attorney in his family. So I know you shouted him out on your Instagram page, but we wanted to do a special shout out for him as well. I definitely think it speaks to what you said about encouraging the next Black generation to do well and into this legal profession, because we definitely need more Black lawyers. With that being said, thank you again for joining us. And as always, we're rooting for everyone Black. Take care, everyone.